Hello everybody, this is John Mark Johnson Jr. again, host of Reform GGA, and today we're going to be continuing our series on double action, single action autoloaders. In particular, today we're going to be talking about handgun etiquette, and we have two major topics. First is giving and receiving a firearm from someone. I'm not talking about as a gift, it's physically handing it off. What's the proper way to do that, and of course receive it on the other side. And then the other side of it is going to be, what is the proper etiquette for once you've received a firearm? Like say you go into the gun store and you say, hey, I want to see that one. Once you got it in your hand, what do you do with it? Okay. What are the basic things that you're going to do with it to check it out? And where kind of are the limits are as far as what is considered appropriate to do with it and what not? Or if a friend happens to let you see their gun, what's appropriate to do with it and what isn't? That's going to be our topics for the day. Giving and receiving the firearm, and then once you have it, what's okay to do, what's not okay to do. So we'll start with the giving and the receiving of the firearm. Let's say you go ahead and you pull the gun out of your holster, and you've noticed that I have a good firm grip on it, and my trigger finger is not on the trigger, it's not even in the trigger guard, and I'm going to pretend like I'm going to hand the gun off to someone. Okay, so my friend said, oh, you got a CCP09, which is what this is. They say, I'd really like to see that. And I said, well, I got one right here, I'll go ahead and show it to you. So I've pulled it out, have my trigger finger, of course, in a safe place. You'll notice that the barrel is in a safe direction. Now, this gun, it is technically loaded, but it's loaded with dummy rounds right now. As a lot of you guys know, I travel for work, and in hotels, there's not a whole lot of really good safe directions. And so to mitigate any risk of anything happening, I just use dummy rounds because dummy rounds can't go off. There's no powder charge to go off. So that's how we're doing a safe demonstration here. But of course, if you're carrying the gun and somebody asks to see the gun that you're carrying and you trust them to see it, you're going to be dealing with potentially a loaded firearm. So like we talked about in the safety video, you need to make sure that you're controlling the gun properly, you got good finger control, and you're also controlling the muzzle. You're pointing it in a safe direction. Most of the time, that's going to be down. Okay, not out at the person that you're talking to or waving it up in the sky, usually down. Okay, and this is where things can go really wrong. It's really easy to mitigate the problem, but a lot of times there's a problem when people hand off a gun to someone, especially someone who's inexperienced with guns. Sometimes people will make the mistake of handing off a loaded firearm to somebody else, and if the person has a decent amount of experience, you might be able to get away with that, but a lot of times handing someone a loaded firearm is not a good idea. And so the proper etiquette is to actually unload the gun for them so that they don't have to incur any risk when you give it to them. And then there's also the practical side of this being something that you're carrying for your safety. It's not a good idea relative to your own safety to give somebody else your loaded weapon. Okay, giving somebody else a loaded weapon is not usually a great idea. So for the practical purposes of maintaining your own safety relative to this other person, who probably won't hurt you if you're letting them mess with the gun anyways, but still want to be on the safe side. For your own safety, and then as well as theirs, even experienced gun handlers, when it comes to transferring a gun that is loaded from one person to the next, mistakes can happen. So the polite thing to do, this is not considered rude at all. It's not saying, oh, I don't trust you with a loaded weapon or anything like that. No, it's considered the polite thing to do when somebody asks to see your gun to go ahead and unload it. So that's what we're going to do with this one here. Like I said, it only has dummy rounds in it, so there's no real risk here, but we're going to go ahead and act like it is loaded. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and unload it, and like I said in other videos, to unload a semi-auto like this, you want to remove the magazine first, and then take the round that's in the chamber out. Okay, so always magazine first, and then deal with the chamber. And the reason why you do it in that order is because if you try to move the round that's in the chamber out first, without taking out the magazine, when you close the slide, you're actually going to wind up loading another round. You're trying to unload the gun, not reload the gun, so take out the extra rounds first, and then deal with the last one. So it's always magazine first, then chamber. To get the magazine out, we'll just go ahead and hit the magazine button. Magazine comes out, and you can see those wonderful red dummy rounds that are in there. Completely inert, no powder to go off, completely safe. And then after you have taken the rounds out of the handle, you've removed the magazine, there's still potentially one round that's in the chamber and you need to move that out next. And so while you have a good firm grip on the gun, but still make sure you keep that trigger finger off of the trigger, you're going to go ahead and just yank back on the slide, and you can probably hear the round hit the ground. That is perfectly fine. No worries there whatsoever if you happen to drop a round on the ground. My favorite saying when it comes to that is that a round on the ground is always safer than a round in the chamber. Okay, and then to retrieve the round, it's pretty simple. You just bend down, pick the thing up, inspect it, make sure that it isn't dirty or anything like that or damaged. And once you've inspected it, you can put it off to the side somewhere, maybe in your pocket or something, alongside the magazine. Go ahead and stow that in a safe place. And now you have an empty gun. Now before you hand off the gun to someone, the polite thing to do is to go ahead and open up the slide. Okay, push on the little slide stop button, open up the slide, and show the person that you're going to hand it off to that the gun is empty. So you'll say, no magazine. I can feel that there's no magazine. You'll look into the chamber and say, I can see that there's no round. And then you're going to give it a shake to make sure that the slide doesn't come flying forward. And then after you've shaken it and make sure that the slide is secure, then you stick your finger in there and you make sure that the chamber is actually empty, that you can actually get your finger into the hole of the barrel, into the breech, make sure that there's nothing in the way. And just doing that for them, showing them nothing in the mag well, feel that there's nothing in the mag well. I can see that there's nothing in the chamber. I can feel that there's nothing in the chamber. Doing that for the other person is a sign of respect. Hey, I care about you, I care about your safety, and so I don't want you to have to worry when I give this gun to you. So let me show you that I'm taking the due steps. And then when you give it to them, you'll notice how I'm holding it. I'm holding it by basically by the slide side. I'm leaving the handle open. And that's so that when I give it to the other person, they can actually grab it by the handle and get a good, firm, solid grip on it. Okay. So that is basically the procedure for handing a firearm off to someone. So let's go ahead and go over that real quick again. So we've taken the gun out of the holster to show to the person who wants to see it. Before we hand it off to them, though, we're going to make sure that the gun is empty. Why? Because handing a loaded firearm off to someone is generally not a safe thing to do. So the courteous thing, the polite thing to do, is to always unload it for them. And we do that by taking out the magazine first. And then we're going to go ahead and pop out the round that's in the chamber. And while you're popping out the round that's in the chamber, if you want to go ahead and lock the slide open, that's just fine. Okay, so I've locked open the slide. You heard the round hit the ground. I can go ahead and check the gun from here. I'm going to maneuver it so that I can put it in a position to hand it off. I'm going to show the person, hey, there's no magazine in it. I can feel that there's no magazine in it. I can look into the chamber. I can see that there is no round. Give it a shake to make sure that the slide is secure. It's not going to come flying forward. And then go ahead and put your finger in there. Make sure I can feel that it is completely empty. And say, okay, my gun is unloaded. Now you can take a look at it. And this way the person can take the gun without any worry that anything is going to happen. Now they can just see the gun and relax. I'm going to go ahead and grab the round here. Like I said, check and make sure that it's clean, make sure that it's not damaged, and then go ahead and set it aside. Okay. And that is the proper procedure for handing off a gun. Now when you're receiving the gun, of course, you're going to get it kind of from the other side here, so I'll go ahead and switch it over. They should hand it to you handle first. That's the courteous thing to do. Unfortunately, at some gun stores, they're not really all that careful and polite as they should be. So instead of opening up the gun and showing it to you and giving it to you by the handle, sometimes they'll do all kinds of strange things that they shouldn't do, and in that case be very, very, very careful, of course. And frankly, it is perfectly fair to point out to someone who is not being safe with a firearm that they're not being safe with a firearm and that they shouldn't handle it that way. And if they have a problem with that, that's probably not the gun store for you, especially if you're a new buyer. Okay. They should open up the gun for you and they should hand it to you handle first so that you can go ahead and grab it, get a full grip on it, make sure that you keep your firing finger off of the trigger, And that way you are in complete control of the gun, and if it's already open, you can go ahead right there and do your own check, and it's perfectly polite to do that. They should check and make sure that it's unloaded and show you that it's what they're doing to make sure that it's unloaded, and then when you receive it, go ahead and check the gun. Go ahead and check the mag well, make sure that there's nothing in that mag well, look into the chamber, visually see that it's empty, give it a shake to make sure that the slide doesn't come forward, go ahead and stick a pinky finger in there to make sure that it is duly empty, and then once all of that is done, you can go ahead and close up the gun. Just go ahead and pull back on the slide and gently release it forward. And it is very important that you do it gently. There are some semi-autos that you can just simply hit the button on them. The slide release button, slide comes flying forward, and it's not going to damage them significantly, but that's not the case with all guns. There are a lot of guns out there, especially the more expensive ones, that are very much so designed so that the slide works properly against a bullet being loaded into the chamber. That's the only time that they are designed to have the slide flying forward, is when a round is being chambered. If the gun is empty and they don't have that round to push against to put into the chamber, that is going to be really hard on some guns. It can actually damage them, especially over repeated times of doing that. For example, there are a number of custom guns out there, of course, but one of the most common guns to customize is the 1911. It's not technically, usually at least, it's not technically a double action, single action gun. Normally it's just a single action only. But a lot of people will put a lot of time and money into getting the action on them really precise and light and crisp and making them really, really, really great little shooters. The problem though is that when you do that, the tolerances get so light and so close that letting the slide fly forward without pushing around in there can actually wind up damaging the gun. And that is the case very often with a lot of the more precise, specially worked on autoloaders. And so when you close that slide, you want to be gentle. It's not your gun, at least not yet. It's not your gun, and you want to make sure that you're not damaging it. So go ahead and release the slide slowly to make sure that you don't damage it beyond what is necessary. And if you do wind up damaging the gun, there's a good chance, if the person behind the counter notices it, that you could wind up buying a gun that you didn't intend to buy, and potentially a very expensive gun that you didn't intend to buy. So be careful with the product, because if you're not careful with it, you might wind up paying for it. Okay. So you receive the gun, you go ahead and check it, you close up the slide, and then you can start looking at all the other gizmos and gadgets. On a double action, single action gun, one of the things you're going to want to check out is the decocker. And this one has the decocker on the rear, and this one is also ambidextrous. Just go ahead and push it to feel what it feels like. You've already checked that the gun is empty. That's a perfectly valid thing to do. And it also takes a lot of the extra spring tension out of the gun, so that is okay. Another thing that you're going to, well, before we get into all the things you can do once you got it, let's go over the receiving procedure again. Okay, so someone hands the gun to you. Hopefully they hand it to you open. You grab it by the handle, making sure that you keep your trigger finger off of the trigger. Once you have it, you go ahead and you inspect the mag well. Okay, visually you look and make sure that it is indeed empty. Hopefully the person who did it before you showed you that, but it's still considered polite to do it again, just to make doubly sure that the gun is safe. Okay, look and make sure that the mag well is empty. Feel that the mag well is empty. Give it a shake to make sure that the slide isn't going to come flying forward. You can see inside the chamber that it's empty, and you might need to trade hands like I did, but make sure you keep your trigger finger off the trigger. And feel inside to make sure that it's empty. And then once you've done that, go ahead and close up the gun, but do it gently. There are no rounds in it, so that slide has nothing to push against when it's closing. So you need to provide your own resistance so that you don't wind up damaging the gun. Okay. And then after that, you can start looking at gizmos and gadgets. Since it's a double action, single action gun, one of the things you're going to want to work with is the decocker, if the gun has one. The decocker is usually behind the slide stop. Okay. And it's usually activated just by pushing down on it. There are some different versions, and if you're not sure how the decocker on the gun works and you're at a gun store, just ask them and they'll usually be more than happy to tell you how it works. Go ahead and decock it so you can figure out how it works and how it doesn't. And you notice that it brought the hammer forward. That's what it's supposed to do. And then one of the next things you're going to want to do is you're going to want to check out the sights. The sights on your handgun are one of the most important things, and so if you're going to the store to buy a handgun, before looking at how nice or how bad the trigger is or anything like that, one of the things you're going to want to look at is the sights. So get some kind of a firing grip, and we'll talk about grip more in another video. Okay. And grip is not 100% kind of thing anyways, just because different grips tend to work better with different guns. And a lot of times if you play around enough, you can eventually find a grip that is going to work for the particular gun that you're dealing with, or modify it in some way to get it to work for you. So if it doesn't happen to fit in the hand perfectly, don't be too disconcerted by that. Because like I said, there's lots of things that you can do afterwards to get it to work for you. Now if you're holding the gun and it's just absolutely impossible to get a comfortable grip on it at all, yeah, then that's probably a bad gun for you. But as long as you can deal with the handle, it might not be great, but as long as you can deal with the handle, the bigger issue is usually going to be the sights. So get some kind of a firing grip, go ahead and push out like you're going to shoot, look down the sights, and check and make sure that you can pick them up easily against different colors. And this is why at the gun store you'll see people go ahead and they'll raise the gun, and they'll usually, again, try to point it in a somewhat safe direction. They'll usually be at the rack of guns behind them. You know, don't point it at the shopkeep. That would be a bad idea, or other various customers. Usually you pick some spot on the wall back there and you do your pointing against that, and you take the sights, line them up, and just test them against different colors in the background and make sure that you can pick it out against all the different colors. Okay. And then keep practicing pushing out with it. Does it point naturally for you? So when I bring it out and I push out, are the sights naturally lined, or do I have to kind of adjust to get them there? How naturally does it point for me? Are the sights naturally lining up for me, or do I have to do a lot of adjustment afterwards? And is it a matter of getting used to it? Sometimes you have to do a few reps. Or is it something you can't get used to? It always points in a weird direction for you. You can't get it so that when you come out, the sights are basically on sight for you. And in case you're wondering what the sight should look like, on most handguns you'll have a notch in the back and then the front post. And what you're trying to do is get the front post perfectly in the middle of the two posts in the back. So you don't want it to be high, you don't want it to be low, you don't want it to be way over to one side or the other. You want it perfectly in the middle of the other two. That's what you're trying to do with it, and you're seeing how natural it is for you when you come up and you point out. How does that work for you? And just a little tip, when you're shooting and you get used to shooting, what you're going to wind up doing that's going to usually work the best for most people is to bring the gun up to your eyes, not bringing your eyes down to the gun. So just go ahead and basically stand there like you normally would and bring the gun up to your eye level and see how that works for you. And you should be able to get a sight picture fairly quickly. If you keep pushing it out and you can't get that sight picture within like a half a second, you know, it really takes quite a bit of adjustment to get it to go for you, then that's a grip angle that's probably not going to work very naturally for you. Now with time and training you can get around that, but when it's your first gun, it's nice to have something that's a little bit more natural. So when you bring the gun up to eye level, it should basically already have the sights aligned for you, as long as you're, you know, pointing it out in the right direction. And then, like I said, put it up against a few different colors back there. Oftentimes there'll be a gun rack back there, so you have the black from the guns, whatever the background wall color is, etc., etc. Test it against a few different colors and make sure that you can pick it up against everything. Okay, light colors, dark colors, all those things, make sure that you can see the sights no matter what color it's pointed at. Okay. Then after you've done that, after you've made sure that it points fairly naturally for you, it doesn't have to be perfect, but you know, with a few reps you can get it so that when you bring it up to your eyes, it's basically aligned for you. And the sights you can pick up against all the different colors that you have available to you. Then you can start worrying about things like how it feels in the hand and the trigger pull. As far as how it feels in the hand, like I said, not overly important, because how you grip the gun is going to be much more important than how comfortable it is. Now, like I said, there are guns that are just so uncomfortable you can never get a good grip on them, and that can be a problem. But just because a gun is comfortable does not mean it's going to shoot well. So don't look for that. Just look for a gun that isn't impossible to hold. Okay, something that you can get a good grip on. And as long as you can get a good grip on that you feel secure with, like the gun's not going to roll out of it at all or anything like that, nice, tight, firm grip on it, you're good to go. It doesn't have to be comfortable, but it does need to be something that you can really get nice and tight on. And if there's no way for you to get nice and tight on the gun, it's going to be useless. Even if it's really comfortable in the hand, you can't get nice and tight, kind of useless. And then after that, you can go ahead and you can look at the trigger pull. Now, before you pull the trigger on an unloaded firearm, you always want to ask either the owner, or in the case of a gun store, the person who is showing it to you. Whoever handed the gun to you, get permission from them before firing a gun without a round in it. Okay, that's what is called dry firing. And dry firing, if you're not careful, can damage some guns. Now, a lot of times with center fire guns, which is what most handguns that are going to be sold for self-defense purposes are, those ones are usually going to be okay to dry fire at least a few times. Excessive dry fire can damage a gun, so you always want to make sure you ask the person first. And when you do go ahead and dry fire it, you want to keep it to a minimum. Now, we've already decocked this gun. When you dry fire it, you should test what the trigger pull is like with it decocked, and then also with the hammer back. I'm going to show you how to do that. So we've already decocked it, so the hammer is already forward. We're going to test it. You ask the person, is it okay to dry fire this? And they'll either tell you yes or no. If they tell you no, of course, don't do it. If they say, yeah, it's fine to go ahead and dry fire it, go ahead and bring it up like you're going to shoot. You bring the gun up to your eye level. Okay? And of course, you've already checked to make sure that the gun is clear first. And once you get lined up on a target, and this is very important, when you're testing the trigger pull, the important thing is not how easy or hard the trigger is to pull. Completely irrelevant in most cases. The real issue is how stable your sight picture is while you're pulling the trigger. Because the only thing that matters as far as accuracy with a gun is where that barrel is pointed the moment that the trigger goes off. That's the only thing that determines where the bullet is going to go. It's the only thing that actually determines the accuracy. So what you're actually testing is how stable you are with the gun. You're not actually testing trigger pull per se, you're testing how well you can pull the trigger. So what you're going to do is you're going to push out, you're going to find something to point at out there, and you're going to test and see how stable the gun is while you pull the trigger. Does it look like the front sight is moving? Does it bop down? Does it kind of pull to the left? Does it pull to the right? What happens as you pull the trigger? So you push out, find a target out there, begin your trigger pull, nice and smooth, and what you're trying to do is see what happens to your sight picture as you pull the trigger. It shouldn't change. That's what you want. Now, when you're moving the gun, there's going to be some motion, so it's always going to change just a little bit, but you want to see how stable you can get that sight picture. Okay. So again, to demonstrate the first pull, not the second pull, but the first pull, with the gun decocked, you push out, you find a target out there, and you try to keep those sights as stable as you possibly can while you pull. And go ahead and keep your trigger finger all the way back, because for the second pull, you're going to do a little bit different way, but just go ahead and keep that trigger pulled all the way back. And like I said, on that first one, actually on both pulls that I'm going to show you, you're looking for how stable your sights are. Okay, you're not checking and saying, oh, this trigger pull is so heavy, or oh, this trigger pull is so light. Doesn't really matter that much. What you're checking and seeing is how good you are at keeping those sights nice and stable while you pull the trigger. Oftentimes it's easier to do that with a lighter trigger pull, but not necessarily. Okay, your sights will tell you how good the gun is for you, not the weight of the trigger. If it's a heavy trigger or a light trigger, in and of itself doesn't matter. The question is, how stable are those sights? Okay, so I tested it with the double action pull. Now I need to test with the single action pull. And to do that, with your trigger finger still pulled back, go ahead and rack the slide. And again, let it come forward gently because you don't want to damage it. That'll bring the hammer all the way back, and instead of decocking it like we normally do with the hammer all the way back, we're instead going to fire. You're going to let your trigger finger out a little bit. That will be the reset points, and this is a good thing to test. Figure out how far out my trigger finger has to come before I can take the next shot. Typically, the smaller that distance is, the easier it is going to be to use that gun. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and let it out until I hear it click in place. There we go. That is the reset point for this gun. And this is fairly typical for a lot of defensive guns. This reset point is usually fairly far out there, at least a good 1/4 of an inch, if not more. That's fairly normal. And you want there to be a little bit of a delay in a defensive gun because it gives you more time to think about what you're doing, to decide whether or not you need to keep doing this, those kinds of things. It's built to give you some time delay. And then, again, you're going to go ahead and line up the sights on something, and you're going to test and see how well you can keep those sights stable with that when you pull the trigger. Now this time the hammer is all the way down, so it should be a little bit easier this time. Okay, so again, we're pushing out. We've already checked the resets, and the goal is to keep those sights as stable as possible. And then once you're done, you can go ahead and move your trigger finger to a safe position. And that is all that is considered polite to do when testing the trigger. 2 pulls, that's it. Okay, if it's somebody else's gun, 2 pulls is what is considered polite. 1 to test the double action, and then the second one to test the single action. So again, you've received the gun, you go ahead and check and make sure that it's clear. Give it a shake before sticking your finger in there, just make sure that the slide isn't going to come in on you. Go ahead and let the slide come forward. Since it's a double action, single action gun, decock it. And then, like I said, the first thing that you want to do after figuring out how to decock the thing is check the sight picture. Bring the gun up to your eye level. Check it against different things in the background to make sure you can pick up the sights wherever. And then also to practice pointing out with it to make sure that the sights are going to line up fairly naturally for you. If you go out and they keep coming down or they keep coming up, the angle of the handle might be a little off for you, and it might be worth looking at a different gun. Okay. So go ahead and test out the sights, test to make sure that it's going to point naturally for you, and then after you've done that, then you can worry about the trigger pull. Do the first trigger pull in double action. Again, bring the gun up to you, pick something in the background, and while you're pulling the trigger, try to keep it as stable as possible. Hold that trigger pull. Keep holding it down, and while it's pulled down, go ahead and rack the slide. Gently guide it forward. The hammer will be back now. Go ahead and get on target again. Release the trigger until it clicks in place, so it gives you an idea of how far out you have to go. And then pull the trigger again. Try to keep those sights as stable as you can. And then release. Move your trigger finger to a safe position. And that will give you an idea of how it is to use the gun. Like I said, to be polite, only pull the trigger twice. Okay, always ask them, is it okay if I dry fire it? They'll either say yes or no. And if they're okay with it, no more than twice. Once for double action, and then once you do the double action pull, go ahead and keep your finger back. Rack the slide. That'll bring the hammer all the way down. Release to test the reset, how far out you have to go to pull the trigger again, and then in again, but looking down the sights. You want to see how stable your sights are while you're pulling the trigger. For a lot of people, lighter trigger pull, it's easier to keep the sight stable, but that's not always the case. And I mentioned this in one of my other videos. This gun right here has a very heavy trigger pull, especially in double action mode. It's like 10 to 12 pounds. But even though it's a 10 to 12 pound trigger pull in double action, I can still hold it very steady, and I can still get very accurate shots off, even though it's so heavy. Okay, how smooth the trigger is, how well you can work it, how well the gun fits your hand so that you can get the the proper movement on the trigger. Those things are going to be a lot more important than is it heavy or is it light. Just pulling the trigger by itself isn't going to tell you what you need to know. Lining up the sights on something and then looking at that sight picture and seeing how stable it is as you pull the trigger, that's what's going to tell you what you need to know or not. Okay? And that pretty much covers it. That is double action, single action handgun etiquette. How to hand it off, never loaded. Make sure that you open it, check it, clear it. Show the person that you're checking and clearing it. When you receive it, go ahead and check it and clear it again. Close the gun up. Figure out how to decock it. You might have to ask the person behind the counter how to do that, and that's just fine. Decock it. And then with their permission, you can go ahead and dry fire it, but only if they give you their permission, because dry firing can damage some guns. CZs are notorious for that. I've modified this one so that I can dry fire it, but CZs are one that you should not really dry fire, especially out of the box. But you can modify them so that you can get around that. But check with the person first. They're going to know the gun best. Ask them if it's okay, and if it is okay, your first trigger pull is going to be the double action one, and you go push it out there. Make sure you get it lined up on something. Keep the trigger back, drop the slide, point out again, release the trigger so you know where the reset point is. Pull, make sure that you are keeping a look at the sights to see how much those sights move. Okay, and that is the basic etiquette for handling a gun. Always give it to the person empty. Check it before you give it. When you receive it, check it. Decock it to take all the, close up the gun and then decock it to take all the tension out of it. Ask them if it's okay to dry fire it. If they say yes, don't dry fire it more than twice. The first one will be in double action. With the finger still held down, you're going to go ahead and rack it again so that you can see what the reset is. And then you'll test single action. And both of those with the gun pointed at something that you're testing, and you're going to be watching those sights to see what they do when you pull the trigger. Okay. With the more stable that the sights are for you, the better the gun is going to shoot for you. Okay, it doesn't matter if it's comfortable or not, just so long as it's not so uncomfortable that you can't use it. Okay, it doesn't really matter if it's comfortable or not. What matters is, do you have a stable trigger pull with the gun or not? Okay, and of course, even before that, make sure that you can pick up those sights on a wide array of colors. Like I said, pointing at the back where all the guns are in the gun store is usually a pretty good way to test, because you have the nice black guns. You usually have something that's much lighter color around there, like a white wall or something like that. You can get an idea for how the sights are going to work up against different colors. All right, that covers it. Thank you very much for your time, folks. Bye.